All right, ladies and gentlemen, and we are here. It is Wednesday, and you know what that means? Time to continue our series in the Kybalion. And we are on chapter number 11, the fifth Hermetic principle we will be diving into today is entitled Rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The great fifth Hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm, embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measure of motion, a to and from movement, a flow and inflow, a swing, forward and backward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between the two poles that are manifest on the plane of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual planes. The principle of rhythm is closely connected with the principle of polarity described in the preceding chapter, in the preceding episode of this series that we went through. And polarity, ladies and gentlemen, was an amazing one. We had some great spots, especially some points that we highlighted there. The change is not in the nature of transmutation of one thing into another thing entirely different, but merely a change of degree in the same things. A vastly important difference. For instance, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc., but heat may readily be transmuted into cold simply by lowering the vibrations. And in the same way, and this was the most important point last week, talking about polarity and alchemy, mental alchemy, in the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable, and so are fear and courage. And so, polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person, and his or her polarity in that class of mental states thus changed. It is along this principle polarity that we covered last week and in the previous chapter of this series. And if you're just joining us, thank you so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen. We are diving into the Kybalion Hermetic philosophy today, looking at the fifth Hermetic principle of rhythm. And we're reading this for purposes of teaching and commentary and expanding the mind so that through an increased awareness, we can hopefully increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Also for purposes of entertainment. But hopefully we get something out of this, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, a pure philosophy as stated by Hermes Trismegistus, or the Egyptian sage god Thoth. A pure philosophy is a spiritual striving through a constant contemplation, a constant meditation, a constant rumination, a ponderation, a thinking upon this wisdom of the ages so that we may come to attain true knowledge of, as described by Hermes, Atum, the one God, all things, the universe, reality. And so, thus, a mental scientist bringing his or her own mind up to the desired vibration by our trained will, and thus obtaining the desired polarization in our own case, then produces a similar mental state in others by induction. This was very fascinating, and that was an incredible chapter. And so today we find ourselves on rhythm, the pendulum swing that manifests in everything. The to and the fro, and the measure of the swing to one side is the measure to the other side. A high tide and a low tide. And so between the two poles from polarity that we discovered from last time, manifested on the physical, the three great planes, which we talked about in the planes of correspondence a few episodes ago in the series, which is the mental plane on the lower, the physical plane on the lower, the mental plane in between, and the spiritual plane on the higher. The three great planes, which break down into 7 versions of themselves each, respectively. Now, once again, the principle of rhythm is closely connected with the principle of polarity described just now. Rhythm manifests between the 2 poles established by the principle of polarity. So, talking about heat and cold and how there's this gray area of where anybody can say where heat starts and where cold ends or begins, but it is merely a measure of degree between the two as one and the same thing, even though we call them separate. This was the paradoxical unity in duality, or the crazy oneness of two-ness, if you want to describe it that way. But this wild nature of reality of how 2 things are but one thing. And so this rhythm is what goes between the 2 poles that are merely a difference in a measure of degree. With that being said, the principle of polarity described manifests between the 2 poles of polarity. Rhythm is in between. This does not mean, however, there's always a however in life, ladies and gentlemen. The pendulum of rhythm swings to the extreme poles. So this does not mean that this pendulum of rhythm goes to the very edges, for this rarely happens. In fact, it is difficult to establish the extreme polar opposites in the majority of cases. But the swing is ever toward first one pole and then the other. There's always an action and a reaction. The kitten came to listen today. Hope everybody is having a wonderful day. Hope the weather is beautiful wherever you are, or actually just hope it's a beautiful day regardless of the weather. Always liked that one. And all right, sweet. She didn't knock over the painting. Good kitten today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, sorry. A little bit of levity. This is always fun. Once again, disclaimer, I am no master. I am just here on this journey, discovering this for myself and learning here in the moment and sharing that with you so we can learn and grow and discover together to, as I always say, seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Well, to me, it's a greater awareness and a greater understanding of the nature of ourselves, of spirituality, psychology, and reality, so that through this awareness we can increase the quality of our lives and be, as Wayne Dyer's definition of enlightenment from his teacher, Swami Muktananda, I believe, was that enlightenment is being immersed in and surrounded by peace. And so if we can use this awareness, this new understanding of ourselves and reality, then hopefully we can bring more quality to our lives, more peace. Let me continue. There is always an action and a reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking, manifested in all of the airs and phenomena of the universe. Suns, worlds, men, women, animals, plants, minerals, forces, energy, mind, and matter, and yes, even spirit, manifests this principle of rhythm, this flowing backward and forward. And I would ask you now to think of times in your life where you have witnessed or experienced this type of rising tide and lowering tide, or this swinging to and fro of different areas and interests and feelings, emotions, maybe levels of success or lack thereof in life, and how life is full of these peaks and valleys. And it is and how we always know, when we're in the doo-doo or the caca, as Wayne Dyer puts it, that there's a good time coming. And when we're in the good times, that we can surely expect that there is some doo-doo or caca coming. But this seems to be the case in reality. And isn't it interesting how this works? Let me know in a comment an area where you've experienced or felt this before. Suns and worlds and animals and plants, forces, even energy, as well as mind and matter and spirit, manifest this rhythm. This principle manifests in the creation and the destruction of worlds, in the rise and the fall of nations, and in the life history of all things. And finally, which is why I asked for you to relate your own experience with this, finally, in the mental states of human beings, of men and women, beginning with the manifestations of the Spirit, the All, God, the one God, it will be noticed that there is ever the outpouring and the indrawing, the outbreathing and the inbreathing of Brahman. And isn't that so funny that yesterday we just had a reference to Brahman and Atman? Let's go back to that reference now, since it be fitting here. Since it be fitting here, ladies and gentlemen. Because right here it was Vedanta, a part of Hinduism. Atman is the individual consciousness, so us, manifest here, and Brahman is universal consciousness, so God, Atum, the one God, which goes back to the first Hermetic principle, which is mentalism, which embodies the truth that all that is manifest or all that we see is within the mind of God, is held within the mind of God. The universe is mental. But we see here that it is expressed that we are also Atman and Brahman, us and God are one. And so, going back now to the correlation that we were making here from Vedanta, is this outbreathing and this inbreathing of God or Brahman. And as the Brahman words it, universes are created, reach their extreme low point of materiality, and then begin their upward swing. Suns spring into being, and then their height of power being reached, the process of retrogression begins. And after aeons, they become dead masses of matter, awaiting another impulse, which starts again their inner energies into activity, and a new solar cycle has begun. This is right now is making me think of the great year and the yuga cycles, and how this pendulum swing of the golden ages on the top, and then the silver and the bronze and the dark ages, not talking about metals, but talking about the level of consciousness, and describing this same exact swing or this to and fro of the pendulum on our levels of development, and to do with this materiality, mental levels of existence, as well as spiritual levels of existence, and these cycles that we go through. And thus, it is with all the worlds. They are born, grow, die, and only to be reborn. And thus it is with all things of shape and form. They swing from action to reaction, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. Thus it is with all living things, that they are born, they grow, they die, and then they are reborn. So it is with all great movements, philosophies, with great creeds and fashions and governments, nations, and all else. Birth, growth, maturity, and then new birth after decadence. The swing of the pendulum is ever in evidence. The universes are created. It's very interesting how this could be a description of everything from the lowest plane to the highest plane, the microcosm to the macrocosm, and once again embodied the principle of correspondence, the as above, so below, and as below, so above. Mentalism, though, The all is mind and the universe is mental. Keeping in mind this mental nature of things and how we can relate to that in this swinging of the pendulum of the principle of rhythm, which is ever in evidence here in the physical, mental, and spiritual realms. And so it may be applied to all planes of life. It may be applied to any question or phenomena of the many planes of life. It may be applied to all phases of human activity. There is always the rhythmic swing from one pole to the other. The universal pendulum is ever in motion, and the tides of life flow in and out according to law. Principle of rhythm is well understood by modern science and is considered a universal law as applied to material things. But the Hermeticists carry the principle much further and know that its manifestations and influence extend to the mental activities of man, and that it accounts for the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, and other annoying and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. But the Hermeticists, by studying the operations of this principle, have learned to escape some of its activities by once again transmutation, alchemy. In this case, once again, mental alchemy. The Hermetic masters long since discovered that while the principle of rhythm was invariable and ever in evidence in mental phenomena, still there were two planes of its manifestation so far as mental phenomena are concerned. And remember, there are 7 subplanes of each of the 3 great planes. So there are 7 physical planes, 7 mental planes, and 7 spiritual planes. They discovered that there were 2 general planes of consciousness, the lower and the higher, and the understanding of which fact enabled them to rise to the higher plane and thus escape the swing of the rhythmic pendulum which manifested on the lower plane. In other words, the swing of the pendulum occurred on the unconscious plane, and the consciousness was not affected. This they call the law of neutralization. Its operations consist in the raising of the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity. So they're using the law of vibration or the principle of vibration, as well as the principle of polarity or the knowledge of that principle and its workings and transmutation of mental states into other mental states by vibrations, as well as now understanding the law of rhythm. Its operations consist in the raising of the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity. Once again, above the vibrations, the vibratory level. And remember, it's all a scale, merely a difference in a matter of degree from the lowest to the highest, all one thing. But so that the negative swing of the pendulum is not manifested in consciousness, and therefore they are not affected by it. It is akin to rising above a thing and letting it pass underneath of you as you're sitting up here, which is very interesting to do this in a mental process rather than a physical process, but we have known this is possible. The Hermetic master or advanced student, which I am neither, polarizes himself to the desired pole, rather at the desired pole. And by a process akin to quote unquote refusing to participate in the backward swing, or if you prefer, a denial of its influence. See, I think this has to go with our trained will power. But our denial of an influence over us, we stand firm, steadfast, I'll add, never swaying, but we stand firm in our polarized position and allows the mental pendulum to swing back along the unconscious plane. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery accomplish this, more or less unknowingly, and by refusing to allow their moods and negative mental states to affect them, they apply the law of neutralization. So I guess I have done this a few times. That last bit described there, I could relate with very well. Because as somebody who has been researching self-mastery, self-actualization, spirituality, psychology, philosophy, and all of these wonderful subjects that I enjoy sharing with you and going through myself here in this journey of life, here on the physical, mental, and spiritual planes, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I'm no master, but we can do this. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery do this sometimes, whether it's few and far in between or more often, but we refuse to allow our moods and negative mental states to affect us. And we apply the law of neutralization. The master, however, carries this to a much higher degree of proficiency, and by the use of his will, his or her will, once again, willpower being one of the most important things when it comes to manifesting or doing this kind of work, is your will. In the use of his will, he attains a degree of poise and mental firmness, almost impossible of belief on the part of those who allow themselves to be swung backward and forward by the momentum of the mental pendulum of moods and feelings and different mental states. The importance of this will be appreciated by any thinking person who realizes what creatures of moods and feelings and emotion the majority of all of us people are. I mean, if we could gain mastery over our emotional and mental states, then we would really have mastery over ourselves. But somebody once said to me, they said, well, wouldn't you then become like a robot or, something that doesn't experience emotion? Kind of like the Vulcans, I believe. But it's like this idea of just being pure logic. And I mean, you would be able to progress and you wouldn't deal with as many, negative emotional states and struggles that are sometimes extremely illogical. And as Wayne Dyer described in his very first book, your erroneous zones. Step-by-step advice for escaping the trap of negative thinking and taking back control of your life. This is what's being talked about here in this wisdom of the ages that comes to us from the Kybalion, William Walker Atkinson, and the three initiates. And this idea of the law of neutralization in mental alchemy and self-mastery. This is why I love this kind of work, because this is what I'm most interested in, and is this self-mastery, this mental, how we can find a better way to experience life. Simply have a better quality of life. And our lives are made up of moments, so we can have better quality moments and we can stack those. Simple. It's very simple. I don't know why this is so complicated, but so simple at the same time. But this is what we're doing. We're learning to go beyond our quote unquote erroneous zones or our illogical, negative emotional behaviors. But back to that question, wouldn't you just then be a robot? And I countered back and I said, no, because we would still have those feelings. So if you had zero emotion, like the Vulcans, and all you had was pure logic, then you would be just that. But if we could be like that, if we could choose logic and control and resist and go beyond and transmute and change our emotional states, our moods, our mental states, then we would be gaining the positive qualities of the logic and living from that perspective. See, I'm thinking of when, like, we're making Star Trek references here, but when, Spock is trying to tell Captain Kirk, like, listen, this is the logical way to go. This makes perfect sense. And Kirk is all wrapped up in his emotions, and he says, no, we have to fight and push and go this way. And there's these two different perspectives and viewpoints that we can have, and we have this within us. This was the, I think, example being presented, is that we are each these kind of archetypes within ourselves, and we are the logic and we are the emotion at the same time, pulling and pushing and, going against or working together all at the same time. And so what is being described here is if we can go above and polarize ourselves with the desired pole, a process akin to refusing to participate in the backward swing or the negative mental pendulum, a denial of its influence, so to speak, if we prefer. We stand firm and steadfast in our polarized position of logic and reason and allow the mental pendulum of emotion to swing back along the unconscious plane. Once again, all individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery, so not the top degree, any degree. So if you're here, thank you, and you have attained some degree of self-mastery, give yourself a pat on the back. We are the few. However, there is always a however in life. We accomplish this more or less unknowingly, and by refusing to allow our moods and our negative mental states to affect us, we apply the law of neutralization. But as the robot, or the pure logic, would never experience the positive emotions on the other side, we have that opportunity. And so that was my, the ego feels great. That was my great rebuttal to this idea of, well, if we didn't have emotion and we were just pure, wouldn't we be just robots then? And it was like, well, no, actually, we would still have access to the positive emotional states. We would just have this new ability to see the logic to go beyond the erroneous or illogical behaviors of the negative and self-destructive mental emotional states. Random side tangent there. If you'd like me to do your erroneous zones in a series on this channel, Dr. Wayne W. Dyer's first book ever, let me know. I'd love to do that and share that with you. Because if you're plagued by guilt or worry or finding yourself repeating the same self-destructive behaviors, then we have erroneous zones. And we all do, ladies and gentlemen. Whole facets of our approach to life that acts as barriers to our success and our happiness. It's time we discover how to take down and destroy these erroneous zones, these illogical, continued, repeated, self-destructive behaviors. And when we attain a degree of poise and will power and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on part of those who allow themselves to be swung backward and forward by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings, then we can really experience a peace that surpasses all understanding, as one great master put it. But the importance of this is obviously appreciated by any thinking person who realizes what creatures of moods and feelings and emotions we all are, and how little mastery of ourselves that we truly manifest. Now, if we will stop and consider a moment, we will realize that these swings of rhythm have affected us in our life, and how a period of enthusiasm has been invariably followed by an opposite feeling and mood of depression. And likewise, your moods and periods of courage have then also been succeeded by equal moods of fear. But remember, as we learned in Polarity, that love and hate are separate things from courage and fear. So they cannot be transmuted into a different class, but only into each other. So you can transmute or alchemize fear back into courage, but you cannot transcend. You get what I'm saying there. And so it has ever been with the majority of people. Tides of feeling have ever risen and fallen with them, but they have never suspected the cause or the reason of this mental phenomena going on, this swinging of the pendulum to and fro. An understanding of the workings of this principle will give one key to the mastery of these rhythmic swings of feeling and will enable us to begin to know ourselves better and to avoid being carried away by these inflows and outflows of the swing of the pendulum. The will, once again, the willpower, is superior to the conscious manifestations of this principle. The will. We must begin now working on our mental willpower. This has a lot to do with manifestation because you have to know what you want to think. The secret of the universe, what you think about, expands. And so often, all we can think about is the things that we don't want, the things that aren't working right, the things that we can't just seem to get to work, the things that we're missing in our lives, and what we, seem to. And our focus on all of this is an untrained will and a lack of realizing that we have to focus on what it is that we desire and what we want. And so this goes to positive, like if you do not have enough money, there's two ways to think of that. You can think of it negatively as, oh, I never have enough money. Or you can take a positive stance of, okay, I have what I have, which is what it is. And now I'm going to take a productive, positive stance of how can I think in a positive way instead of I don't have enough and never have enough to I obviously have where I am, which is, irrelevant once again on the everything is one thing, just a difference in a measure of degree. And sure, you can say there's a difference between a lot and a little, but it's all one pole of the same thing. And so, how do we transmutate, polarize towards the opposite pole using the knowledge of vibrations? Well, we shift our thinking and our willpower to, first of all, I am abundant, even if your senses are showing you the physical evidence that you are not. Because we know we can't rely on our senses. Our senses tell us that we're just sitting here still. But there's a whole lot of action going on in the universe, and we know that our senses aren't giving us a correct formation of reality. And we can't see, all the different spectrums and waves of light and sound and, everything. We're not getting a full picture of reality based on our senses. So if we know we can't trust our senses, then we go to another level. We go to the mental plane. And on the mental plane, we say, yes, our senses aren't telling us that we are abundant, but we are going to tell our emotional states and our senses that we are abundant. And then, from this new positive perspective, we can begin to work in a direction and taking the action of becoming and aligning with that part of ourselves that we already are. Remember, when you're attempting to manifest, there is nothing that isn't you. If everything is God, God is universal, then that means there is nowhere that it is not. So it is within you and it is also within the thing that you desire. And that thing also desires you. But if we live from the perspective that we don't have it and don't want it, that is what the desire will go out. You don't have, it's, I don't know. I'm getting off track here, but I was just trying to describe that there is a way to use this willpower, which is superior to the conscious manifestation of this principle. Although the principle itself can never be destroyed, we may escape its effects, but the principle operates nevertheless. The pendulum ever swings, although we may escape being carried along with it. I find myself asking, how do you feel abundant when you're not abundant? It's almost like you have to go against what your senses are telling you. Anyway, that's a different subject, and we talk about that. I've been going through Manifest Your Destiny by Dr. Wayne W. Dyer, and I've talked about manifesting a lot on this channel before. It's a subject that has to do with every other subject because it is how we create our lives every day using our minds. And like I was going back there, we need to begin to train our will so we can have the will to focus and have our intentions on what it is that we desire rather than what we're struggling with all the time. Creating new alignments. Another reason, though, I'm so passionate about this is because I need it from myself. So I share this somewhat selfishly and somewhat unselfishly. But I feel like we all need this. And so I'm like, if I'm going to be getting this for myself, let's do it together, ladies and gentlemen. But once again, I am no master and I struggle. I struggle just as much as any of us, relatively. The pendulum ever swings, although we may escape being carried along with it. There are other features of the operation of this principle of rhythm of which we wish to speak at this point. And we've got a couple more pages. And I'm tempted to leave it there. Let's just see what it has to say here. There are other features we wish to speak of at this point. There comes into its operations that which is known as the law of compensation. Interesting. One of the definitions or meanings of the word compensate is to, quote unquote, counterbalance, which is the sense in which the Hermeticists use the term. It is the law of compensation or counterbalancing to which the Kybalion refers when it says, the measure of the swing to the right is also the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The law of compensation is that the swing in one direction determines the swing in the opposite direction, or to the opposite pole, then one balances or counterbalances the other. On the physical plane, we may see many of examples of this law. The pendulum of the clock swings a certain distance to the right and then an equal distance to the left. The seasons balance each other in the same way, and the tides follow the same law. And the same law is manifested in all the phenomena of rhythm. The pendulum, with a short swing in one direction, has but a short swing in the other, while the long swing to the right invariably means the long swing to the left. An object hurled upward to a certain height has an equal distance to traverse on its return, the force of which a projectile is sent upward. A mile is reproduced when the projectile returns to the earth on its return journey. This law is constant on the physical plane as a reference to the standard authorities will show you. But the Hermeticists will carry it still further, as they always do, beyond the physical plane into the mental and the spiritual planes. They teach that man's mental states are subject to this very same law. And so the man who enjoys keenly is subject to keen suffering, while he who feels but little pain is capable of feeling but very little joy. This is very interesting. The pig suffers but little mentally and also enjoys but little. He is compensated. And on the other hand, there are other animals who enjoy keenly, but whose nervous organism and temperament cause them to suffer exquisite degrees of pain. And so it is with us, with man and women. But there are temperaments which permit but a low degree of enjoyment and equally low degrees of suffering. This is making me think of the Buddhist teaching. Zero, if you have less desire, you have less suffering. No desire, no suffering. But that this is also telling us then you have no enjoyment either. Without the enjoyment, you don't have the suffering. While there are also others who permit the most intense enjoyment, but also the most intense of suffering. The rule is that the capacity for pain and pleasure in each individual are balanced, and the law of compensation is in full operation here. Very fascinating. But the Hermeticists go still further in this matter. They teach that before one is able to enjoy a certain degree of pleasure, he must have swung as far proportionally towards the other pole or feeling. They hold, however, that the negative is precedent to the positive in this matter. That is to say, in experiencing a certain degree of pleasure, it does not follow that we will have to pay up for it. I'm liking this with a corresponding degree of pain. On the contrary, the pleasure is the rhythmic swing according to the law of compensation for a degree of pain previously experienced either in the present life or in previous incarnations. This throws a very new light on the problem of pain and struggle and suffering and everything that I'm so obsessed with discovering how to transcend and go beyond. This is amazing. I might have to go over this a second time in the future, but let us continue because this is amazing. Let's begin to highlight a little bit here. Because this is an important section to consider. Once again, I'll remind us in every single one of these episodes, the first words of Hermes Trismegistus and the wisdom of the pharaohs, Thoth, the Egyptian sage god there, the Ibis god, teaches us how we can understand this. I said earlier already in this video, a pure philosophy is a spiritual striving through a constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of Atum, the one God, but through a constant contemplation. So we got to keep thinking about this, especially me on this part here that we're going through right now, considering the transmutation and going above the negative swing of the pendulum using the law of neutralization, as mentioned before in this video. The Hermeticists regard the chain of lives as continuous and as forming a part of one life of the individual, so that in consequence a rhythmic swing is understood in this way, while it would be without meaning unless the truth of reincarnation is admitted. And so this idea of the swing of the pendulum, of pain to pleasure, from one life to another life, incarnation to another incarnation, is but one life of the soul or the spirit or the individual. And I've never heard that through all our incarnations, it is but one life. That's cool. I like that. The Hermeticists claim that the master or advanced student is able, to a great degree, to escape the swing towards pain by, once again, the law of neutralization, the process of neutralization mentioned before. By rising or rising onto the higher plane of the ego, much of the experience, usually this is referred to as transcending the ego, much of the experience that comes to those dwelling on the lower plane is avoided and escaped. Remember, this also has to do with vibration of the different planes, levels of consciousness. You get David Hawkins did great Power versus Force and The Eye of the Eye, many different books about transcending the levels of consciousness or rising above these lower planes that can be avoided and escaped. I never know what I'm going to title these videos. The law of compensation plays an important role, an important part in the lives of us, men and women. And it will be noted that one generally pays the price of anything he possesses or lacks. If he has one thing, he lacks another. The balance is struck. No one can keep his penny and have a bit of the cake, quote unquote, at the same time, and everything has its pleasant and unpleasant sides. The things that one gains are always paid for by the things that one loses. The rich possess much that the poor lack, while the poor often possess things that are beyond the reach of the rich. The millionaire may have the inclination towards feasting, and the wealth wherewith to secure all the dainties and luxuries of the table, while he lacks the appetite to enjoy the same. He envies the appetite and the digestion of the laborer, who lacks the wealth and inclinations of the millionaire, who gets more pleasure from his plain food than the millionaire could even obtain if his appetite were not jaded nor his digestion ruined, for the wants, habits, and inclinations differ between the two, and each experiences their own manifestations between the two poles in the planes of polarity, vibration, and rhythm. The three laws and principles of Hermetics that we have been discussing over these last few episodes in this series in the last few weeks. And so it is through life for all of us. The law of compensation is ever in operation, striving to balance and counterbalance, and always succeeding in time, even through several lifetimes, before the return swing of the pendulum of rhythm. That is a boom to the fifth great Hermetic principle of rhythm, having to do a lot with polarity and vibration. These all work successively into each other. Next being that of cause and effect, which will be the sixth Hermetic principle, followed by the final, gender. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was incredible. That was a boom to the Kybalion Hermetic philosophy coming to us from William Watker Atkinson, and the two that inspired him, namely the three initiates. And we'll leave that there for now. Be sure to expand the description below the video, description box down there. You hit more and you will find a link, Amazon link, affiliate link to this book so you can get it for yourself to put it on your shelf and follow along in future episodes of this series, as well as just to have for personal reference. Physical copies, ladies and gentlemen. Very important, I think and believe. With that being said, also remember, seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of ourselves, spirituality, psychology, philosophy, so that through this awareness, nature of reality, we can increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Remember to seek to discover the lost wisdom of the ages and the mysteries of our history. And also keep in mind that there is no way to happiness. Why? Because happiness is the way. It is the ability that we must create within ourselves to bring to life. And then all the things we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll finally be happy when I get this much and have that thing, becomes irrelevant because then we are there. And hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. Coming up to say goodbye, kitten. Man. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time. Oh, yeah. Also, a link to C60 Power, the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Give yourself the gift of health. And also a link to my Etsy shop and my landscape paintings. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be the change that you want to see. Be the example you want to set. No, 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 no. Thank you.